My name is Jane. I used to think silence was a gift. After years of working double shifts at the diner, raising our son mostly alone while Carlos built his business, I'd come to appreciate those rare moments when the house didn't echo with his voice, high-pitched, commanding, always tinged with some quiet disappointment. That Friday morning was unusually quiet. Carlos had gotten ready in a hurry, muttering about his mother's blood pressure and how she needed someone who really cared. He'd barely kissed me on the cheek before slamming the front door. The wheels of his suitcase clinked down the porch steps like a starting gun. I should have been relieved, but instead I stood frozen in the kitchen, still holding my coffee, watching the steam rise like the breath of a dying animal. It wasn't until Bruno stumbled in, clutching his tattered stuffed fox and whispering, "Mommy, we have to hurry," that my stomach dropped. He wasn't smiling. I crouched down, brushing the hair from his forehead. "Honey, what do you mean?" He glanced over his shoulder, his eyes darting nervously down the hallway. "Come on," he whispered. "I found something you're not going to like." Kids play, imagining monsters in closets, pulling swords out of broomsticks. I thought that was all. Maybe he'd found an old Halloween prop or one of Carlos's weird hunting knives. But when he led me into the garage and pointed to the red toolbox, Carlos's sacred place, I hesitated. We were never allowed to touch it ever. Bruno lifted the lid. At first I saw only the usual screwdrivers, pliers, and a roll of duct tape. But then he moved the top tray. Beneath it was a stack of glossy photos, packed in a plastic bag with rubber bands. My heart leapt into my throat. The photos were of me sleeping, of me showering, of me on my back in the kitchen, wearing nothing but a robe. Some of the shots were from above, as if they had been taken from a corner of the room. I gasped. Bruno jumped. "Why did Daddy take these pictures?" I didn't have an answer, but I knew we had to leave. Not in an hour, not tomorrow now. I grabbed Bruno's hand and ran. I didn't pack or even grab a toothbrush. I shoved my phone in my back pocket, grabbed Bruno's coat from the hook in the hallway, and yanked the garage door open. I hadn't driven in weeks. Carlos preferred it that way. He said I was too anxious behind the wheel, that I couldn't concentrate, that he'd better take care of the chores. But my hands remembered. They shook as I turned the key. The old Chevy's engine whined as if it, too, was waking up from a long silence. "Seatbelt up, honey," I whispered, and Bruno obeyed instantly, his face pale and serious in the morning light. We backed out of the garage, slowly, carefully. I didn't even look at the neighbor's house, though I wondered if they'd seen anything if they knew. As soon as we were 2 blocks away, I exhaled for the first time. I could still smell the plastic bag that had held those photos, still hear the click of Carlos's camera shutter, though I'd never heard it before. "Where are we going, Mommy?" His voice was small, too small for a 6-year-old. "I still don't know," I said honestly. And I didn't know. I hadn't spoken to anyone outside Carlos's circle in months. The last friend I'd had, Alice, Carlos had told me was a gossip, someone who would twist my words and cause trouble. I believed him then, always had. But as I drove, my mind sorted through what was left of my life outside of him. Elisa. She used to babysit Bruno when he was a baby. She and I had had a falling out after Carlos said she'd meddled by offering me books on parenting. I hadn't spoken to her in almost 3 years, but she lived an hour away and I remembered the name of the street. I pulled onto the highway, my hands shaking. I turned off my phone and Bruno's. "Just for now, okay? We'll call you later." He nodded. We drove in silence. Halfway there, I stopped at a gas station and paid in cash. I caught a glimpse of myself in the bathroom mirror and barely recognized the woman staring back at me. My eyes were sunken, my lips chapped. When had I stopped taking care of myself? When had I started whispering in my own home? I thought of the first time Carlos had yelled at me, not the loudest, but the coldest. Bruno had spilled orange juice on the carpet. I had rushed to clean it up, apologizing as if it were my fault. Carlos stood there for a full minute, then looked at me with narrowed eyes and said, "It's not the mess, it's that you didn't teach him better." That sentence had stuck with me like a hook in the soft part of my chest. We arrived in Elisa's neighborhood around noon. Her house was small, painted yellow with white shutters and 2 wilted potted plants on the steps. Bruno took my hand. "Will she be mad?" I asked. "I don't know," I said, "but I think she'll answer the door." I knocked twice. Nothing. My heart began to pound. I knocked again, harder this time. Then I heard the lock click. The door opened a crack. Elisa stared at me through the opening, older, with shorter hair, but her eyes were the same. I tried to speak, but no words came out. She looked at Bruno, then at me, and without saying anything, she opened the door wide. Elisa didn't ask any questions right away. She just pulled me into a tight hug, as if something had been waiting in her chest for years and had finally been released. I didn't cry, I couldn't. The part of me that cried was locked away, buried under years of walking on eggshells. She led us into her small but cozy living room, where the curtains were open and a quilt lay on the couch. The air smelled of cinnamon and lavender. It was the first time I'd breathed without tension since Carlos had left that morning. Bruno sat next to me, clutching his stuffed fox, his eyes darting around the room as if he couldn't believe it wasn't a dream. Elisa brought him a glass of apple juice and some cookies. "Do you want to talk?" she finally asked. I shook my head. Not yet. We sat in silence for a while, listening to the ticking of the old clock on her mantelpiece. Eventually I told her everything, not just about the toolbox but about the years leading up to it, the way Carlos made me feel small and then guilty for feeling small, the way he would correct me in front of Bruno and then accuse me of undermining him when I spoke, the time he'd drained my phone battery because I spent too much time on Facebook. Elisa listened without interrupting. Her expression was calm, but her fingers curled tightly around her mug. "He isolated you," she said finally. "He made sure you had no one else to go to. That's what men like him do." I nodded. "And now I don't know what to do." "We'll figure it out," she said. "You're not alone now." I wanted to believe that, but then fear began to creep back in like smoke under the door. Carlos wasn't stupid. He would know I was gone, and the first place he'd check would be wherever I'd been before he took over. "Elisa, we can't stay here long. He might come looking." She nodded grimly. "You can rest today. Tonight, tomorrow morning, we'll make a plan." I put Bruno to bed in his guest room and lay beside him until he fell asleep. His breathing was slow and steady, and for the first time in weeks, there was no tension in his small forehead. Back in the kitchen, I found Elisa looking through a manila folder. "My cousin works at women's shelters," she said. "He gave me this information a while back, in case you ever—" Her voice trailed off. I sat down across from her. "I hadn't even known I needed it. But you did. You weren't ready then. Now you are." I took her hand and squeezed it. Then I made a mistake. I turned my phone back on. Within seconds, a message popped up. "Where are you, Jane?" No name, no number, just those 4 words. My breath caught in my throat. A minute later, a second message came in. "You're scaring Bruno. Come home." I turned the phone off again, but it was too late. I could feel it in my bones. Carlos knew. I stared at the phone as if it had grown fangs. 2 messages. That was all it took to pull me back into the same silent panic I thought I'd escaped. Elisa gently took the phone from my hand and set it face down on the kitchen table. "Did he track you?" I nodded slowly. "I don't know. Maybe he always knew when I was going somewhere, even if I didn't tell him. He said I was predictable." "We have to assume your phone is compromised," she said calmly, but there was a tension in her jaw that hadn't been there before. "He could have put tracking software on it, or on Bruno's tablet, or in the car. I hadn't thought of that." I felt stupid for not having thought of it, but Elisa didn't say, "I told you so." She just stood up and began gathering things, her car keys, her own phone, a backpack from the hall closet. "Come on," she said. "Let's not wait for him to find you here." She took us to a public library 2 towns away. There, under the dull hum of fluorescent lights, she used a computer to search for safe houses and legal aid clinics. She printed out pages of information, highlighting those run by nonprofits that offered legal advice and trauma counseling. "I'll take you wherever you choose," she told me, "but you have to be the one to make the call." That stuck with me. For the first time in years, someone wasn't trying to fix me or silence me. Elisa was offering me tools, but handing me the hammer. That afternoon, while Bruno slept in the backseat of her car, I used a pay phone outside a diner and called a shelter listed as a confidential location. The woman on the other end of the line had a warm, steady voice. She didn't ask why I was running away. She asked if I was safe, if my son was with me, and if I had access to transportation. That night, we had instructions. Arrive at a public park at sunset, wait on the west bench. No calls, no texts. We followed them. A woman named Nils met us at the park, wearing a baseball cap and carrying a reusable shopping bag. She didn't introduce herself right away, just said, "Are you Jane?" And when I nodded, she smiled and said, "Come on, I've got your back now." Nils' car was a nondescript, a slightly dusty navy blue sedan. She didn't ask any questions as I loaded Bruno into the back seat. The shelter was in a converted house with a white porch and sturdy locks. Inside, it smelled like lemon cleaner and something warm from the oven. Nils gave us a room in the back with 2 twin beds and a dresser. "You'll be safe here," she said. "Cell phones off, no social media, no contact with anyone you don't completely trust." I nodded, and for the first time I slept. I mean, real sleep, the kind that comes not with an open ear but with peace. But peace is short-lived when you're living in survival mode. The next morning, as Bruno ate cereal with the other kids in the communal kitchen, Nils knocked softly on our door. "We need to talk," she said. "Your husband filed a missing person report." I felt my knees weaken. What does that mean? It means he's playing nice, making it seem like he cares. It's standard for men like him. And if the police find us, we'll be safe here, but you need to start thinking long-term. Long-term. I hadn't thought beyond the day I ran away. Now I had to. Nils led me to a quiet room the next day. It had soft lighting and thick walls. She handed me a notebook and pen. "Start writing everything down," she said. "Every incident, every word you remember, from the first time he raised his voice to the last text message you received. It's not about building a case yet. It's about putting it somewhere other than just inside yourself." I hesitated. My hands hovered over the page. Where do you start when the pain is so quiet you almost forget it's pain? I wrote, "The first time Carlos made me feel like I was crazy was on our honeymoon." And the rest came flooding back, the night he turned off the air conditioning in the middle of August and told me I was imagining the heat, the time he deleted messages from my sister and told me she had stopped contacting him, the look in his eyes when I wore makeup he didn't approve of, and how he called me desperate in a low voice, the way he isolated me from every woman who tried to warn me. I filled 3 pages before I even realized the time. Nils glanced over and gave me a small nod. "Good, keep going. You're getting your voice back." Bruno adapted quickly to life at the shelter. The other children welcomed him, and the volunteers knew exactly how to talk to kids like him, kids who had learned to walk on tiptoe around their parents. But I saw the signs. He flinched at loud noises, asked permission to speak, slept with the light on. One night, I found a crayon drawing on his bed. It was our old house, but the windows were all dark, and in the corner, a stick figure of me stood behind a door. Bruno had drawn himself outside, holding my hand, with a big arrow pointing to him and the word safe. I held the drawing to my chest and cried, finally releasing the tears I had been holding back for years. Later that week, Nils scheduled a meeting with a legal aid attorney named Maria. She was quick-witted, direct, and wore reading glasses that she tapped thoughtfully against her chin. "I've seen men like your husband before," she said. "They act like model citizens. They use charm as a weapon. Filing a missing person report isn't about worry, it's about control. If we act too slowly, he could turn it into abandonment and use it against you in family court." Family court. The phrase chilled me to the core. He could try to get emergency custody, say you're unstable, that you ran off with your son, that he's scared for Bruno's safety. "He's never cared about Bruno like that," I whispered. Maria leaned in. "That won't stop him from pretending to care. He just needs a judge who doesn't know the truth." So we began. I handed her the photos from the toolbox, wrote down every memory I could muster. Nils helped me recall conversations, the times Carlos had humiliated me in public, made me feel invisible, manipulated Bruno into fearing my disapproval. We began to build a case. Nils also helped me apply for an emergency restraining order. We didn't know if it would be granted yet. The judge needed to review the case. I asked her, "What happens if he finds us before then?" Her expression darkened. "We've had women disappear before the paperwork was done," she said, "but you're smarter than that, and you're not alone this time." That night, I didn't sleep. I just held Bruno close and listened to the soft hum of the light in the shelter hallway. Somewhere out there, Carlos was preparing his next move. I was preparing mine too. 3 days passed before we got the call. Nils tapped and handed me the envelope. My fingers trembled as I opened it. Inside was a single-page document, stamped with the county seal. The emergency protective order had been granted for 30 days. Carlos was legally barred from contacting me or Bruno. I treated the paperwork like a miracle. It wasn't permanent, and it wouldn't stop him from seeing us if he really tried, but it was something. It was the first official word, not just from a friend or counselor, but from a system that finally believed in me. I took it to Maria that afternoon. She scanned it quickly and nodded. Good, now we're using that momentum. We discussed the next legal steps: filing for sole custody, filing for a long-term restraining order, preparing the paperwork for when Carlos made his next move, because he would. Maria knew, Nils knew, and deep down I knew too. But there were moments, small moments, where the light came on. One morning Bruno ran up to me holding a ladybug on his finger, his face lit up with wonder. Another night he drew a picture of me in a cape and wrote underneath, "Mommy equals the heroine." These little things became my oxygen. I also started group sessions at the shelter. Every woman in that circle had a story, some worse than mine, some quieter, more subtle, like shadows you didn't see until they wrapped around your throat. There was a woman named Lydia, whose husband locked the thermostat and punished her with cold. Another Anna, whose partner said no one would ever want her after 3 kids and a face like that. We shared coffee and fear, but we also shared survival. People think abuse is bruises, Lydia once said, but mostly it's invisible silence, until it eats you alive. I nodded, knowing exactly what she meant. Later that week, Maria called. Her tone was curt. He's filed a motion. My mouth went dry. For what? Emergency temporary custody. He's claiming you're mentally unstable, that you kidnapped Bruno, that he fears for the boy's safety. There's a hearing scheduled for Friday. That gave us 3 days. Will they believe him? I asked. They might. He has no priors. You have no physical evidence other than the photos, and the assigned judge is known for favoring co-parenting, even in high-conflict cases. I sat down heavily on the bed, the room spinning around me. What can we do? We've fought. We've prepared. I'm filing a response, attaching the photos and your written statement. We're going to request an in-person hearing, and you're going to testify. You're going to tell the judge everything. In-person hearing, and you're going to testify. You're going to tell the judge everything. My stomach turned. I hadn't seen Carlos face-to-face since the morning he left. Do I have to be in the same room with him? Yes, but you won't be alone. Nils went with me to the mock hearing that Maria had organized that night. They explained to me how to speak, where to look, how to respond without freezing. And then, before we finished, Maria said something I hadn't expected. Jane, I know this is terrifying, but I want you to understand something very clearly. She leaned forward. He's not in control anymore. That's why he's doing this, because he knows you're pulling away. I took a deep breath and, for the first time since this nightmare began, I wasn't just surviving, I was preparing for war. The courtroom was colder than I'd expected, not in temperature but in mood. Steel benches, beige walls, and a judge whose expression hadn't changed once during the first hour of the proceedings. Carlos was dressed in a freshly pressed charcoal gray suit, his tie modest, his shoes polished. Beside him was his attorney, a woman with shiny hair and a stack of files so thick it made my stomach churn. When he entered the courtroom and saw me, he didn't move. He offered a small, almost apologetic smile, as if we were about to discuss a shared misunderstanding over coffee. I looked away. Maria placed a gentle hand on my forearm and whispered, "Stay strong. Don't let the performance get to you." The judge called us to order and then invited Carlos's attorney to begin. She painted a troubling picture. Carlos, the devoted father, blindsided when his wife, who had no job, no known income, and a history of emotional instability, disappeared with their son. She emphasized the disruption to Bruno's upbringing, the trauma of being separated from his family, the urgency of restoring stability. Stability. The word echoed in my bones like a threat. Then it was Maria's turn. She moved slowly, methodically. She presented the restraining order. She handed over the hidden photographs Carlos had taken, images of me vulnerable and unconscious. She read excerpts from my statement. Then the judge looked at me. "Mrs. Martinez, you may speak." My knees shook as I stood. I didn't look at Carlos, I couldn't. "I'm not mentally unstable," I began, my voice shaking. "I left because I was scared, not just for myself, but for my son. Carlos, he never hit me, that's true, but he hurt me every day." I went on about the photos, the psychological manipulation, the control, the way I disappeared into myself until I couldn't remember the sound of my own laughter. I saw something flash in the judge's eyes, but his face remained unreadable. Carlos finally spoke. He stood, hands clasped in front of him, and said all the right things. That he was sorry for any pain his wife felt, that he just wanted to support her mental health journey, that he missed his son terribly. He even cried. I don't know how he did it, but he cried 2 perfect tears. It was the same performance I'd seen at our wedding when he'd told the story of how we met, and people had sworn he was the sweetest man in the world. For a moment I thought the judge believed him, but then he said, "Temporary custody will remain with Ms. Martinez until the final custody hearing in 2 weeks. The child's current status appears to be stable. Supervised visitation for Mr. Martinez is permitted upon coordination through the court." Carlos's jaw clenched. It was quick, but I saw it, that crack in his mask. Outside the courtroom, Maria pulled me aside. "You did exactly what you had to do," she said. "You told the truth. That's harder than it looks in cases like this." But I wasn't relieved. Not really. Because Carlos had lost the first round, and men like him don't lose quietly. That night, back at the shelter, I tucked Bruno into bed and stood next to him. He looked peaceful, as if the noise of the day hadn't touched him, but I knew that wasn't true. I kissed his forehead and whispered, "No matter what happens, we're going to be okay." I wasn't sure I believed that, but I needed him to because Carlos was still out there, and something told me he wasn't done. The first supervised visit was scheduled for 3 days after the hearing. It would be at a neutral family center run by social services, with a staff member present at all times. The room was painted pale yellow, with plastic furniture and a large one-way mirror that allowed observers to monitor the interactions. Bruno clung to me when we arrived. I crouched down and smoothed his hair. "You don't have to hug him or talk if you don't want to," I said. "Just be yourself. I'll be waiting when you're done." He nodded, his lips pressed tightly together, as if he were swallowing something too big for his mouth. Carlos arrived 10 minutes late, not late enough to be penalized, but late enough to make a statement. He smiled the moment he saw Bruno. "There's my big boy," he said, arms outstretched. "I've missed you so much, champ." Bruno didn't move, staring at the floor. Carlos's smile faltered for a second, then returned, forced but still in place. The session lasted exactly 45 minutes. I watched from afar. Carlos tried every tactic. Jokes, gifts, souvenirs. He even cried again at one point, pulling out an old photo of the 3 of us from a trip to the beach 2 summers ago. But Bruno didn't laugh, didn't smile. When he was done, he walked straight into my arms. Her voice was barely above a whisper. "He smells like our house." I hugged him tighter. That night, Nils asked if I wanted to talk. "I feel horrible," I said, "like I'm punishing Bruno for putting him through this." "You're not," she said gently. "You're showing him that he has a choice, that love isn't about fear. That's more than most kids in his situation will ever get." I nodded, but the guilt clung to me like damp clothes. 2 days later, I received an envelope from Carlos's lawyer. Inside was a letter, not legal, not official, just personal. It began, "Jane, I don't recognize who you've become." He talked about how he was trying, how he missed his family, how he was willing to forgive everything if I would come home. Forgive, as if I had sinned by running away. He called the shelter a bad influence, accused Elisa of brainwashing me, and said Bruno needed normalcy. At the end, he wrote, "If you think I'm going to give up on my son, think again." I always finish what I start. Nils took the letter immediately. "He's overstepping the line again, trying to contact me directly. This is a violation of the order." Maria filed a report. I moved rooms at the shelter. Bruno was moved to a different group during playtime. We stayed alert. Every noise outside made my stomach churn, but we also kept moving forward. Bruno started therapy with a trauma counselor. At first, he barely spoke, but after 2 sessions, he asked the counselor if monsters were real. She asked, "What kind?" "The kind that smile and make you feel wrong all the time," he said. When she told me, I broke down, not just with sadness but with pride. He was finding his voice, and so was I. Maria called 2 nights later with news. Carlos had filed a second emergency motion. He claimed that the supervised visit had gone badly because of handling, that Bruno was being coached, and that he wanted full unsupervised access. "He's escalating," she said, "but now we're going to escalate too." I had a week before the next hearing. 7 days to prepare, 7 days to prove that safety is not just a right, it is a fight, and I was finally ready to fight. The week leading up to the hearing passed in a blur of paperwork, phone calls, and moments that felt like they didn't belong to me. Bruno colored more than usual, drawing trees, keys, and houses with locks on the doors. Each drawing he handed me silently, as if we were building a private language that only the two of us understood. I practiced answering questions with Maria every night. She played the role of Carlos's lawyer, relentless and cold. "Why didn't you go to the police sooner? Are you trying to alienate the child from the father? Do you believe you acted in the best interest of your son?" With each answer, I became stronger, quieter too, but with a firmness I didn't know I possessed. The night before the hearing, I didn't sleep. Instead, I stood in the shelter's shared kitchen, staring out the window at the empty street, remembering the sound of Carlos's voice when he was disappointed, when I didn't fold the towels the way he liked, when dinner was 10 minutes late, when I laughed too loudly. I whispered into the darkness, "You're not going to win anymore. Never again." The courtroom was smaller this time, quieter, more intimate. The walls still smelled of dust and cold paperwork. Carlos was already seated when I arrived, his lawyer murmuring something in his ear. He didn't look at me this time, didn't smile. Maybe he knew. Maria leaned in. "You just have to tell the truth. You've already done the hard part, leaving." The judge entered, and the session began. Carlos's lawyer launched into a speech about paternal rights, about a boy needing a father, about stability and structure and redemption. But this time there were no tears from Carlos, only silence, a measured, rehearsed silence. Then it was my turn. I stood up, and the courtroom disappeared. "I'm not here today because I want to hurt anyone," I began. "I'm here because my son deserves to grow up without fear." I described the toolbox, the photos, the silent cruelty, the ways Carlos had made me feel like I was slowly disappearing, until my son was the only thing anchoring me to reality. I read a quote from Bruno's therapist, which I had submitted in writing. "Bruno demonstrates classic trauma responses consistent with long-term emotional distress and coercive control in the home." As I sat down, Maria squeezed my hand once. The judge adjourned the session for 40 minutes. We waited in the hallway, pacing back and forth. Nils had come too, standing at a respectful distance, arms crossed, as if she were keeping me upright from afar. Then the bailiff returned. We walked back into the courtroom. The judge's decision was brief, but his voice was firm. "Custody will remain with Ms. Martinez. Mr. Martinez will have no contact pending further evaluation by court-appointed psychological professionals. A long-term restraining order is hereby granted." I didn't cry, not right away. But when I walked out of that courtroom and saw Bruno waiting for me with Nils, his small arms wrapped around my waist, I exhaled for the first time in what felt like years. A few weeks later, we moved into a small rental house with blue shutters overlooking a quiet street. I started a part-time job at the community center. Bruno started school. On the first day, he wore a cape and called himself Brave Boy. I smiled and said, "You are?" And I believed it. I was too. It took a lot of courage for Jane to take the first step, to leave. She had already experienced so much silent violence, and little by little she discovered that the person who should have taken care of her family was the one who was hurting them emotionally, and she managed to leave at the right time. Thus, life was starting over in a lighter and calmer way. Tell us in the comments what you thought of Jane's story. If you liked this story, please like the video and subscribe for more moving stories.